They said I'd come crawling back, that leaving him was the biggest mistake of my life. So when my billionaire ex-husband invited me to his baby shower, probably to watch me squirm while he flaunted his new family, I showed up with a child he didn't know existed, his child. Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Tasha Monroe, and I need to tell you about the day I walked back into my ex-husband's life and turned his whole world upside down. But to understand that day, you need to understand who I was before everything changed. 5 years ago, I was married to Cameron Wright. You might know him now, the tech billionaire who's always on magazine covers, talking about innovation and success. But back when we met, he was just a guy with a dream and a laptop, working out of our one-bedroom apartment. I was the one working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I was the one who believed in him when nobody else did. I packed his lunches. I proofread his pitch decks at 2 in the morning. I held him when investors turned him down. I was his partner in every sense of the word. Then his company took off, and suddenly, I wasn't enough anymore. Cameron started spending less time at home and more time with people who wore expensive suits and talked about markets and valuations. He started looking at me differently, like I was a reminder of a life he wanted to forget. The final blow came one night when he sat me down and told me he wanted a divorce. He said I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was dead weight, that he needed someone who could match his new lifestyle, someone who understood his world. Those words, dead weight, they cut deeper than any knife ever could. I signed the papers because I had too much pride to beg someone to love me. He gave me a settlement, probably to ease his guilt, and I moved out of the penthouse we'd been living in. That was 5 years ago. What Cameron didn't know was that I was pregnant. I found out a week after the divorce was finalized. I stared at that positive test for hours, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to call him, to tell him. But then I remembered his words, dead weight. I thought about the way he'd looked at me toward the end, like I was an obligation he couldn't wait to be rid of. So I made a decision. I would do this alone. I had my son, Isaiah, and he became my entire world. He had Cameron's eyes, his smile, his curious mind. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man I'd once loved, before success had changed him. I used the settlement money wisely. I didn't blow it on revenge shopping or a new apartment I couldn't afford. Instead, I invested it. I studied the market, I took risks, and I was smart about it. Within 2 years, I'd turned that settlement into something substantial. I became an anonymous investor in several startups, keeping my profile low because I didn't want Cameron's world touching my son's life. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to provide for Isaiah and give him the stable, loving home he deserved. We lived comfortably but modestly. Isaiah went to a good school. We took trips to the science museum. We had movie nights with popcorn and too much candy. I built a life that was full and rich in all the ways that actually mattered. And I was happy, genuinely happy. I'd proven to myself that I wasn't dead weight. I was strong, capable, and I didn't need Cameron Wright to validate my worth. Then, 3 weeks ago, I got an invitation in the mail. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. It was an invitation to a baby shower. Cameron's baby shower. He'd remarried 2 years after our divorce to a woman named Lauren, a socialite whose face was always popping up in lifestyle magazines. And now they were expecting their first child together. The invitation itself wasn't what got to me. It was the handwritten note tucked inside in Cameron's distinctive scrawl. It said, "Tasha, I'd love for you to come and see what a real partnership looks like. It would mean a lot." I read those words over and over, feeling anger rise in my chest. A real partnership, as if what we had wasn't real, as if I hadn't sacrificed everything for him. My best friend Nicole came over that evening and found me staring at the invitation. She snatched it out of my hands, read it, and immediately started cursing Cameron's name in ways that would make a sailor blush. She told me to throw it away, to not give him the satisfaction. But something in me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, resolved. I looked at Nicole and told her I was going to go. She thought I'd lost my mind. But here's what she didn't understand yet. I wasn't going for revenge. I wasn't going to cause a scene or throw the invitation in his face. I was going because it was time. Time to face the past I'd been running from. Time for Isaiah to see his father, even if it was from a distance. Nicole asked if I was going to tell Cameron about Isaiah. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I'd tried once. Right after Isaiah was born, I'd called Cameron's office. His assistant had answered, cold and efficient, and when I said I needed to speak to Cameron about something personal, she'd told me he was too busy and that I should email. I never sent that email. I told myself it was because I was tired, because I had a newborn to care for. But really, it was because I was scared. Scared of rejection. Scared that he'd accuse me of trying to trap him. Scared that he wouldn't care. So I'd let it go and convinced myself that Isaiah and I were better off without him. But now, holding that invitation with its smug little note, I realized I'd made that decision out of fear, not strength. And I didn't want to be that person anymore. Isaiah was 4 now, and he'd started asking questions about his daddy. Simple questions that broke my heart every time. Where is he? Does he know about me? Why doesn't he come see us? I'd been giving him gentle non-answers, but I knew that wouldn't work forever. So yes, I was going to that baby shower, and I was bringing my son. The morning of the shower, I dressed carefully. Nothing too flashy, but elegant. I wanted to look like I'd moved on, like I was doing well. Because I was. Isaiah wore a little button-down shirt and khakis, and he looked so handsome it made my chest tight. He was excited, thought we were going to a party. In the car, he asked me if there would be cake, and I had to laugh despite my nerves. Nicole drove us because my hands were shaking too much to grip the steering wheel properly. As we got closer to Cameron's estate in the hills, Isaiah's eyes went wide. He'd never seen anything like it. The house was massive, all glass and modern architecture, with a lawn that seemed to go on forever. There were cars everywhere, people in designer clothes milling around with champagne glasses. There was even a photographer and what looked like someone from a local news station. Of course, Cameron had turned his baby shower into a media event. That was so perfectly him. I took Isaiah's hand and walked through the front entrance, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The first person to spot me was Cameron's mother, Brenda. Her eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with that familiar judgment I remembered so well. She'd never thought I was good enough for her son, and she'd made that clear even when we were married. Brenda walked over, her smile tight and fake. She greeted me with air kisses that didn't touch my cheeks, and immediately asked what I was doing there, as if I'd crashed instead of been invited. I kept my voice level and told her Cameron had invited me personally. Her eyes dropped to Isaiah, who was holding my hand and looking around with wonder at all the decorations. Brenda's face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, I heard his voice, Cameron's voice, cutting through the crowd. He was walking toward me with that confident stride, that million-dollar smile. He looked good, I had to admit. Success suited him physically, even if it had cost him his soul. He greeted me with a hug that felt performative, for the benefit of everyone watching. His voice was warm, but there was something sharp underneath it. He said he was so glad I could make it, that he knew things hadn't been easy for me, and he hoped I was doing okay. The way he said it, with that slight condescension, like he was the benevolent ex checking on his poor, struggling former wife. It took everything in me not to laugh in his face. I smiled sweetly and told him I was doing wonderfully. Thank you for asking. His wife Lauren appeared at his side, glowing in a flowing maternity dress, her hand protectively on her belly. She was beautiful and gracious, and I felt a pang of something, not jealousy, but maybe sadness for the woman I'd been, who had stood in her place once. People were staring at us, whispering behind their hands. I could feel their judgment, their pity. Poor Tasha, having to watch her ex-husband celebrate his new family. If only they knew. Cameron was talking. Something about how wonderful it was that we could be mature about everything. When his eyes finally landed on Isaiah, my son was standing slightly behind me, clutching a card he'd made for the baby. Cameron's entire face changed. The color drained from it. He stared at Isaiah like he was seeing a ghost, and I understood why. Isaiah looked exactly like Cameron had in childhood photos. The same deep-set eyes, the same dimple in his left cheek, the same way his hair curled at his temples. Cameron's voice came out strangled. He asked who the child was. The crowd around us had gone quiet, sensing drama. I could have lied. I could have said he was my nephew, my friend's kid, anyone. But I was done hiding. I looked Cameron straight in the eye and said, "This is Isaiah. He's 4 years old. He's your son." You could have heard a pin drop. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth. Brenda made a sound like she'd been punched. Cameron just stood there, frozen, his brain clearly trying to process what I'd just said. Then the anger came. I could see it rising in his face, turning his neck red. He grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly, and pulled me aside, away from the crowd. Isaiah started to follow, but Nicole appeared out of nowhere and distracted him with promises of finding the dessert table. Cameron's voice was shaking when he spoke. He demanded to know if this was some kind of sick joke, some revenge plot. I stayed calm. I told him it wasn't a joke. I'd been pregnant when we divorced. I found out a week after I signed the papers. His eyes were wild, searching my face for lies. He asked why I never told him. And here's where I could have been cruel. I could have thrown his words back at him, reminded him how he'd called me dead weight, how he'd made it clear I had no place in his new life. But I didn't, because Isaiah was listening somewhere in that house. And whatever happened between Cameron and me, I didn't want my son to grow up hearing that his father hadn't wanted him. So I told him a softer version of the truth. I said I'd tried to reach out, that his assistant had turned me away, that by the time I considered trying again, too much time had passed. I said I'd made the choice to raise Isaiah alone because I wanted him to have stability, not to be caught in the middle of our mess. Cameron's face went through about a dozen emotions: shock, anger, hurt, confusion. He asked how I'd managed raising a child alone. And this is where I allowed myself a small smile. I told him I'd done more than manage. I'd thrived. I'd invested the settlement wisely, built a comfortable life for our son. I'd made sure Isaiah had everything he needed, including a mother who was present and devoted. Lauren had followed us, her face pale, one hand still on her pregnant belly. She looked between us, tears in her eyes, and asked if it was true. Cameron couldn't speak, so I nodded. I apologized to her, genuinely. I told her I hadn't come to ruin her day or cause problems. I'd come because my son deserved to know where he came from, who his father was, but I also wanted her to know that I expected nothing from them. No money, no custody arrangements, nothing. I'd raised Isaiah for 4 years without Cameron, and I could continue doing so. Lauren started crying then, and Cameron looked like his entire world was imploding. People were starting to notice the commotion. Cameron's business partners, his mother, other guests, they were all watching, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when one of Cameron's colleagues, a man I recognized from business magazines, approached with a card in his hand. It was the business card I'd slipped to him earlier, just my name and a phone number. He looked at me with newfound respect and said he'd been trying to get in touch with the anonymous investor who'd backed 3 of the most successful startups in the city. He'd had no idea it was me. He turned to Cameron and said, "You do realize Tasha is the T. Monroe who invested in TechFlow, right? The woman's a financial genius. We've been trying to figure out who she was for 2 years." I watched Cameron's face as understanding dawned. I wasn't the struggling ex-wife he'd imagined. I wasn't bitter and broken. I'd built something real, something substantial, all while raising our son alone. The power dynamic he'd assumed, where he was the successful one and I was the failure he'd left behind, it didn't exist. His mother looked like she might faint. The guests who'd been whispering about poor pathetic Tasha were now whispering about something very different. I could feel the shift in the room, but I didn't care about any of it. I just wanted to find my son and go home. I found Isaiah with Nicole near the elaborate dessert table. He was holding a cupcake and grinning, completely unaware of the chaos happening around him. When he saw me, he ran over and asked if we could give the new baby the card he'd made. My heart broke a little. My sweet, innocent boy, who'd drawn a card with crayons for a half-sibling he didn't even understand he had. I knelt down to his level and told him we needed to go, that maybe we'd give the card another time. He looked disappointed, but nodded, trusting me the way he always did. As we headed toward the exit, Cameron caught up with us. He looked devastated, lost. He asked me to wait, to please not leave, that we needed to talk about this. I turned to face him, Isaiah's hand in mine, and I spoke quietly, so our son wouldn't hear the weight in my words. I told Cameron that I hadn't come to his baby shower to parade anything or to hurt him. I'd come because running from the past wasn't working anymore, but I also needed him to understand something. Isaiah was my son. I'd raised him through sleepless nights and teething and first steps and first words. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every triumph. Cameron had missed all of that, and that wasn't entirely his fault, but it was the reality we lived in. I told him that if he wanted to be part of Isaiah's life, truly part of it, then we could talk about that, but it had to be about Isaiah, not about his ego or his guilt or his need to control the narrative. It had to be about being a father, and that was a role he'd have to earn. I wasn't going to hand him access to our son just because his DNA matched. Cameron nodded, tears in his eyes, and I realized I'd never seen him cry before, not even at our wedding. He asked for my number, the real one, not the business line. I gave it to him. Then I picked up Isaiah, even though he was getting too big to carry, and walked out of that mansion with my head held high. In the car, Isaiah asked if that had been his daddy. I told him yes, that was his father. He was quiet for a moment, then asked why his daddy looked so sad. Kids see everything, don't they? I told him that sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, but that his daddy would probably want to see him again soon. Isaiah thought about this, then said something that made me pull over the car so I could cry. He said, "It's okay, Mama. Even if he doesn't want to see me, I have you, and you're enough." Nicole reached back and squeezed my hand while I sobbed, because my 4-year-old son had just taught me more about worth and love than anyone ever had. 3 days later, Cameron called. We talked for 2 hours. He apologized, really apologized, not just for the baby shower, but for everything, for how he'd treated me at the end of our marriage, for the things he'd said, for not being there. He asked if he could meet Isaiah properly, maybe take him to the park or to get ice cream. I agreed, with conditions. We'd start slow. I'd be there for the first few visits, and if at any point Isaiah felt uncomfortable or confused, we'd pause and regroup. Cameron agreed to everything. He also asked, tentatively, about the investments I'd made, about my life, not in a condescending way, but with genuine curiosity and what sounded like respect. And that's why you should never let anyone define your worth. I didn't show up to that baby shower to prove Cameron wrong. I showed up already knowing my value. What do you think? Did I do the right thing by keeping Isaiah a secret, or should I have tried harder to tell Cameron? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't defined by who left them behind. Subscribe for more stories that'll make you think. Until next time, remember, your comeback doesn't need an audience. See you in the next one. My husband told the world our daughter didn't exist, said I was just his help when reporters asked about the black woman in his mansion. 3 years later, I walked back into his life. Not as the broken girl he destroyed, but as the woman who now owned everything he loved. Before we dive into how I made a billionaire fall to his knees, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you'll want to see every moment of this takedown. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated. This one's for us. I need you to understand something right from the start. I wasn't naive. I wasn't some starry-eyed girl who didn't see the world for what it was. I grew up black in America. I knew about prejudice. I knew about people who smiled in your face while holding knives behind their backs. But when you fall in love, really fall in love, you start believing that your love story might be different. That maybe, just maybe, love could conquer everything they said it couldn't. I met Christopher Laurent at a company gala where I was working part-time. I was in my second year of law school, serving champagne to people who spent more on their watches than I'd spent on my entire education. He was the man everyone whispered about, billionaire real estate developer, third-generation wealth, the kind of man whose family name opened doors that the rest of us didn't even know existed. And somehow, in a room full of hundreds of people, his eyes found mine. I'm not going to lie to you and say I didn't notice how handsome he was. Tall, sharp jawline, these intense gray eyes that seemed to see right through all the noise. But what got me wasn't his looks. It was the way he talked to me. Not at me, not down to me. To me. Like my opinions mattered. Like my law school ambitions were impressive. Like I was somebody worth knowing. We started dating, and it felt like a fairy tale I never thought I'd get to live. Surprise flowers delivered to my tiny apartment. Late-night conversations about everything and nothing. He'd pick me up after my classes in his town car, and we'd drive to these little hole-in-the-wall restaurants because I told him I wasn't comfortable in fancy places yet. He said yet like it was a given that I'd belong anywhere I wanted to be. God, I loved him for that. 6 months in, he proposed, not at some expensive restaurant with photographers hiding in the bushes, but in my apartment, sitting on my worn-out couch with rain beating against the windows. He said he couldn't wait another day to make me his wife. We got married 2 weeks later at City Hall. Just us. 2 witnesses we pulled off the street, and a future I thought would last forever. He said we should keep it quiet, not secret, just private. He said the press would turn our love into a circus, that his family needed time to adjust, that we deserved to enjoy being newlyweds without the world watching. Every reason sounded so logical, so protective, so I agreed. I changed my last name legally, but kept using my maiden name professionally. Our marriage certificate sat in a safe deposit box, and I told myself this was romantic. This was us against the world. Then I got pregnant. When I told Christopher, he held me so tight I could barely breathe. He kissed my forehead and said we were going to be a family. He immediately called contractors to renovate one of the bedrooms in his estate into a nursery. For 2 whole weeks, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But then things started shifting. Small things at first. He'd ask me to stay upstairs when he had business meetings at the house. Said he didn't want me stressed by work talk while I was pregnant. When his mother visited, he suddenly had urgent business trips. His friends still didn't know I existed, but he promised he was waiting for the right time to introduce me. The right time just never seemed to come. I went into labor on a Tuesday afternoon. I called Christopher 17 times. He didn't answer. I took myself to the hospital in a taxi, labored for 14 hours alone, and brought our daughter into this world with only a nurse holding my hand. He showed up 6 hours after Lauren was born, smelling like scotch, with an excuse about a deal that couldn't wait. I was too exhausted to fight. I just handed him his daughter and watched him hold her with tears in his eyes, and I forgave him. That's what love does. It makes you forgive the unforgivable. 3 weeks later, everything fell apart. I was home with Lauren when my phone started blowing up. Friends, former classmates, even my mother calling to ask if I'd seen the article. Christopher had done an interview with some major business magazine. It was supposed to be about his latest development project, but the reporter had asked about his personal life, asked about me, because apparently someone had spotted a black woman at his estate and rumors were starting. Do you want to know what he said? I can still quote it word for word. The reporter asked, "There have been some questions about a young black woman spotted at your property. Can you comment on your relationship status?" And Christopher Laurent, my husband, the father of my newborn daughter, said this: "That's actually my housekeeper's daughter. She's been helping with property management and staying in one of the guest houses. I'm very much single and focused on my work." My housekeeper's daughter, guest house, single. I didn't cry when I read it. Something beyond tears took over. I called him, and he actually answered. I asked him to come home, and he said he was busy. I told him we needed to talk about the article. And you know what he said? He said, "Listen, don't blow this out of proportion. You know how the media is." I had to say something. He came home that night, and I was waiting in the living room, with Lauren sleeping in my arms. I asked him to explain. And this man I loved, sat down across from me and said, "Be reasonable. You knew what you were getting into. My family has a reputation. My business partners are conservative. If I publicly claim a black wife and a mixed baby right now, it complicates everything. I'll take care of you both financially. You'll want for nothing. But publicly, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. Like our daughter was a business problem. Like I was a PR nightmare." I asked him if he ever loved me. He said of course he did, but love and business were different things. He said I was being emotional. He said give it time, things would change. He actually had the nerve to say that maybe when Lauren was older and his company was more established, things could be different. I left that night, packed everything I could fit in 2 suitcases, wrapped up my 3-week-old baby, and walked out. He didn't try to stop me, just watched from the doorway, and asked where I was going. I didn't answer. His lawyers contacted me a week later. They offered me $50,000 and had papers for me to sign. Non-disclosure agreements. Documents saying I'd never claim he was Lauren's father publicly. That I'd never speak to the press about our relationship. That I'd never pursue him legally. In exchange, he'd deposit money in an account monthly for expenses. The lawyers said I should be grateful, that most men in his position wouldn't offer anything at all. I signed. God help me, I signed. Because I had a newborn baby, student loans, no job, and $50,000 felt like a lifeline when I was drowning. I told myself I was being practical, that I was protecting my daughter. But the truth is, I was broken. He'd taken everything I believed about love and myself and shattered it. 6 months later, I saw the announcement. Christopher Laurent, engaged to Madison Whitmore, daughter of a senator, Yale graduate. Everything his world considered acceptable. The photos showed them at charity galas, polo matches, society weddings. The press called them the perfect power couple. Headlines gushed about their romance. And I sat in my mother's basement, with a baby on my hip, watching the man who denied us build a public love story with someone else. I fell into a dark place. Depression isn't strong enough for what I felt. I was angry, heartbroken, ashamed, and so tired. My mother took care of Lauren when I couldn't get out of bed. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and watch my daughter sleep, wondering what I was supposed to tell her when she got old enough to ask about her father. But babies have a way of forcing you forward. Lauren needed things: diapers, formula, doctor visits, clothes she'd outgrow in weeks. Christopher's money covered it, but every dollar felt like blood money. I was living off the guilt payment from a man who couldn't publicly acknowledge his own child. The breaking point came on Lauren's 2nd birthday. We had a small party. Just my mother and a few cousins. Lauren was playing with her gifts when she looked up at me with those gray eyes she got from her father and asked, "Where's my daddy?" Not who is he, where is he? Like she knew he existed somewhere, but just wasn't there. I couldn't answer her, and in that moment, something inside me that had been bent finally snapped back into place. That night, after everyone left, I called my old law school mentor, Professor Valerie Green, the woman who'd believed in me before I believed in myself. I told her everything, and she said something that changed my life. She said, "So are you going to let him win? Are you going to teach your daughter that powerful men can just erase us?" I went back to school, finished my law degree online while working 3 jobs. I barely slept. There were nights I studied with Lauren, asleep on my lap. Nights I cried from exhaustion. Nights I wanted to quit. But every time I felt like giving up, I'd think about Christopher's face in that interview, about how easily he'd lied, about how he'd bet I'd just disappear quietly. I graduated at the top of my class, specialized in corporate law and real estate. And while I was studying, I started researching, not just property law in general, Christopher's empire specifically, his company, his deals, his methods. I learned everything. Where he cut corners, where his contracts had weaknesses, where his success was built on shady land deals and tax loopholes that skirted legality. I found out he'd screwed over business partners, pushed out smaller developers using intimidation tactics, built his reputation on crushing anyone who got in his way. The golden boy billionaire was actually a bully with better PR. I got hired at Peterson and Associates, a rival firm, using my maiden name. Nobody connected me to Christopher Laurent. Why would they? I was just another hungry young lawyer trying to make partner. I worked harder than anyone else, took the cases nobody wanted, made myself invaluable, and I waited. Then I made my move, started my own development company with investors who believed in my vision, used everything I'd learned to start acquiring properties, not randomly, strategically. I bought land around Christopher's key projects, properties he needed to make his developments work, and I did it quietly, through shell companies and private sales, so he never saw me coming. His biggest project was a luxury complex on the waterfront. 5 years in planning, hundreds of millions invested. But I owned the 3 properties surrounding his site. Without them, his project couldn't proceed. Access issues, zoning complications, everything fell apart. He tried to buy me out, offered double, then triple market value. But he was negotiating with shell companies. He had no idea who really owned them. His company started hemorrhaging money. Investors got nervous. His board started asking questions. And his perfect life with his perfect fiancée started cracking. Madison left him when the money got tight. Turns out, her love had a price tag, and Christopher was falling below it. Then came the meeting that changed everything. His company finally traced the properties to my firm and requested a negotiation. Christopher wanted to meet the investor who was blocking his project. His assistant sent over a meeting request, and I accepted. I spent 3 days preparing for that meeting, got my hair done, had a suit, custom-made, deep navy blue, that meant business. I put Lauren's picture on my desk nameplate, not hidden, right there in a silver frame. My 4-year-old daughter, with her father's eyes. When Christopher walked into that boardroom and saw me, I watched every emotion cross his face: shock, confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like fear. I stood up, extended my hand like we were strangers, and said, "Hello, Christopher. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He couldn't speak at first, just stared at me like I was a ghost. Then he looked at the photo on my desk, and I saw him recognize those eyes. His hands started shaking. "Surprised?" I asked. My voice was calm, professional, cold as ice. "You wanted to meet the investor blocking your waterfront project. Well, here I am." He tried to recover, started with apologies, explanations, excuses, said he'd made mistakes, that he'd been under pressure, that things were different now, that if he could go back. I cut him off. "We're not here to discuss the past, Mr. Laurent. We're here to discuss business. You need my properties. I'm not interested in selling. So unless you have something else to offer, I think we're done here." He begged. This billionaire, this man who'd acted like I wasn't worthy of acknowledging, actually begged me. Said he'd do anything, pay anything. He asked about Lauren. Tried to say he wanted to make things right. I gathered my papers and stood up. "You had 4 years to make things right. You chose your reputation over your daughter. Now you don't get to choose anything. I do." That meeting was just the beginning. See, while I was buying those properties, I was also talking to people, disgruntled employees, former partners, contractors he'd cheated, and they talked back. gave me documents, emails, proof of fraud and illegal dealings, tax evasion, bribery, environmental violations. Christopher's empire was built on sand. I handed everything to federal investigators, watched his company implode from the inside. His board voted him out. His assets got frozen pending investigation. The Laurent name, that precious reputation he'd valued over his own family, became toxic overnight. I bought his company at the bankruptcy auction, paid cents on the dollar for everything he'd built. His office became my office. His letterhead got replaced with mine. And that mansion where he'd hidden me away, I turned it into a community center, a place for single mothers who needed support, education, legal help. Named it Lauren's Hope. Christopher showed up at my office 6 months ago. Security called asking if they should remove him. I said let him up. He looked terrible, older, tired, broken. He sat across from my desk, his old desk, and cried. Actually cried. Said he'd lost everything. That he finally understood what he'd done. That he wanted to meet his daughter. I let him talk. Let him beg. Let him feel every ounce of powerlessness he'd made me feel. Then I slid a document across the desk, a sworn affidavit acknowledging Lauren as his biological daughter, admitting he'd lied about our relationship, taking legal responsibility. Sign it, I said. Then we'll talk about whether you get to meet the daughter you denied. He signed without reading it. I had it notarized that day and filed for full legal acknowledgement of paternity and back child support from his remaining assets. As for meeting Lauren, I told him he could see her when she's old enough to decide if she wants to know him, and only after he publicly addresses what he did. Not some quiet statement, a real acknowledgement, an apology to her, to me, to everyone who watched him lie. He asked what else he could do. I said, learn to live with your choices. I had to. Today, my company is worth over $500 million. Lauren is 6 years old, brilliant, confident, and she knows exactly who she is. She knows her father exists, and she knows he made mistakes. When she's ready, the truth will be there for her, documented and clear. Christopher works a regular job now, middle management at someone else's company. His family lost their social standing. The Laurent name doesn't open doors anymore, and every single person who watched him lie knows the truth now. But here's what I need you to understand. This wasn't just about revenge, though I won't lie and say revenge didn't feel good. It was about something bigger. It was about refusing to be erased, about showing my daughter that when someone tries to make you invisible, you don't disappear. You rise until they can't look anywhere else. They tried to deny us, tried to act like we didn't matter, like we didn't exist, but you can't deny someone's destiny. You can delay it, make it harder, throw every obstacle in the way, but you cannot stop someone who refuses to stay down. So if this story inspired you, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because I share real stories about people who refuse to stay defeated. Comment below, what would you have done in my situation? And remember, they can try to deny you, but they can never deny your destiny. See you in the next one.
A waitress spotted what doctors missed and saved a billionaire's son's life in minutes. What if a simple act of paying attention could change everything? In a bustling diner on the corner of 5th and Main, where the coffee never stops brewing and the conversations flow like honey, nobody expected that Tuesday evening to be different from any other. The rain drummed against the windows while families gathered around worn vinyl booths, sharing stories over steaming plates of comfort food. Behind the counter, a woman with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of service moved with the practiced grace of someone who truly cared about every person who walked through those doors. She had learned to read people the way others read books, catching the subtle signs that spoke volumes about their hearts, their struggles, their needs. On this particular evening, as the dinner rush began to settle into a gentle hum, her gift for noticing what others missed would prove to be more precious than gold. Where are you watching from tonight? Linda had been serving tables at Joe's family diner for nearly 15 years, and in that time, she had become something of a neighborhood guardian angel. Her customers weren't just orders on a ticket, they were Mrs. Peterson, who always asked for extra cream with her coffee after her husband passed, and young Danny, whose mother worked late shifts and trusted Linda to make sure he finished his homework before dessert. The diner was more than a restaurant, it was a sanctuary where people came not just for food, but for the warmth of being truly seen and cared for. That Tuesday evening started like any other. The familiar sounds of sizzling bacon and gentle conversation filled the air, while the aroma of fresh-baked apple pie created an atmosphere of home. Linda moved between tables with her usual attentiveness, refilling coffee cups and sharing genuine smiles that had the power to brighten even the darkest days. Around 7:30, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a man she had never seen before. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, yet there was something weary about his posture. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had forgotten how to rest. Behind him, almost hidden in his shadow, was a boy of about 10 years old. The child moved slowly, as if each step required great effort. His pale complexion seemed almost translucent under the diner's warm lighting, and Linda noticed how he kept one hand pressed against his side. The man, clearly his father, guided him to a corner booth with the protective care of someone who had learned to anticipate trouble. As Linda approached their table with menus and her warmest smile, she heard the man speaking in hushed, worried tones on his phone. "The appointment isn't until Thursday," he was saying, frustration creeping into his voice. "Are you absolutely certain there's nothing available sooner?" When he hung up, she could see the concern etched deep in his features. "Welcome to Joe's," Linda said gently, setting down glasses of ice water. "What can I get you folks started with tonight?" But even as she spoke, her experienced eyes were taking in details that would soon prove to be life-changing. The boy, who introduced himself quietly as Alex, attempted a brave smile as he studied the menu, but Linda's trained eye caught what others might have missed. His breathing seemed labored, and every few minutes, he would shift uncomfortably in his seat. When his father, Robert, stepped outside to take another urgent phone call, Alex's facade began to crumble. "Everything looks so good," Alex whispered, though Linda noticed he was only pretending to read the menu. His small fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Linda asked, sliding into the booth across from him with the gentle authority of someone who had raised 3 children of her own. "You look a little pale." Alex glanced toward the window where his father paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "Dad says the doctors are just being extra careful," he said, but his voice carried the uncertainty of a child trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "My stomach hurts sometimes, but it's probably nothing serious." Linda's motherly instincts, honed by years of caring for others, began sending quiet alarms through her mind. She had seen this particular combination of symptoms before. The way Alex held his right side, the slight yellow tinge around his eyes, the way he seemed to be fighting nausea with each breath. When Robert returned to the table, Linda noticed the deep lines of worry that expensive suits and successful businesses couldn't hide. "The specialists are all booked solid," he explained to Alex, forcing optimism into his voice. "But we'll see Dr. Morrison on Thursday, and he's the best in the city." As Linda took their order, simple chicken soup for Alex, who claimed he wasn't very hungry, and a coffee for Robert, she found herself studying the child more closely. Her grandmother had always said that sometimes the most important thing you could do was trust your gut, and right now, every instinct Linda possessed was telling her that Thursday might be too late. During a quiet moment between tables, she approached Robert with the careful diplomacy of someone who understood the delicate balance between helping and overstepping. "I don't mean to intrude," she began softly, "but I've raised 3 kids of my own, and I've seen a lot of worried parents over the years. If this moment is touching your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Sometimes, when you love someone that much, you know when something isn't right, don't you?" Robert looked up from his barely touched coffee, and Linda could see the weight of fear he'd been carrying alone. "The doctors say it's probably just a stomach bug," he said, but his voice betrayed his doubts. "Alex has been dealing with this on and off for weeks, but it's gotten worse since yesterday." Linda's heart ached for this father who was clearly fighting his own instincts in favor of medical protocol. She had been in his shoes, remembering sleepless nights when her youngest son ran fever, and she knew, just knew, that something needed immediate attention. "May I ask what exactly the doctors have said?" As Robert explained the various theories and scheduled tests, Linda watched Alex, who had now stopped even pretending to eat his soup. The child was holding his side more frequently, and she noticed a subtle but unmistakable sign that made her pulse quicken: the way he was instinctively drawing his right leg up, as if trying to protect that area from any movement or pressure. Her late husband had been a paramedic for 25 years, and Linda had absorbed more medical knowledge than most people realized during their long conversations about his calls. What she was seeing in Alex triggered memories of her husband's urgent voice describing a particular emergency. When kids start guarding their lower right side like that, Linda, especially with the nausea and that pale complexion, you don't wait for appointments. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a stomach ache. "Robert," she said, sitting down at their table with gentle urgency, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen enough to know that some things can't wait for Thursday." Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling with the weight of what she was about to say. "I think Alex might have appendicitis, and if I'm right, waiting could be dangerous." Robert's face went white. "But the doctors said—" "The doctors haven't seen him in person since this got worse," Linda interrupted kindly but firmly. "And sometimes, the people who love us most are the ones who notice what medical appointments and test results miss." She reached across the table and gently touched Robert's hand. "Have you ever faced something like this, where every instinct told you to act? Let us know in the comments." Alex whimpered softly, doubling over slightly as another wave of pain hit him. Linda's eyes met Robert's, and in that moment, she saw a father's love override every protocol and procedure he'd been following. "What do you think I should do?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but Linda could hear the shift. He was finally ready to trust what his heart had been telling him all along. "I think you should take Alex to the emergency room right now," Linda said firmly but gently. "Don't wait for tests or appointments. Tell them you suspect appendicitis and that his symptoms have gotten significantly worse." As if the universe was confirming her instincts, Alex suddenly cried out, his small body doubling over in genuine agony. The pain that crossed his face was unmistakable. This was no longer something that could be managed with soup and waiting. Robert sprang into action with the decisiveness that had probably made him successful in business. "You're right," he said, scooping Alex up carefully. "Thank you for trusting your instincts when I was too scared to trust mine." Linda quickly grabbed her jacket and keys. "I'm coming with you," she announced, in a tone that brooked no argument. "My car's closer, and I know the fastest route to General Hospital." During the tense drive through the evening traffic, Linda held Alex's hand while Robert called ahead to the emergency room, using the authority in his voice and probably his family name to ensure they would be ready. Alex, despite his pain, managed to squeeze Linda's fingers, and she found herself humming the same lullaby she had once sung to calm her own children's fears. "Why are you helping us?" Alex asked weakly, his young eyes filled with a wisdom that comes from facing something frightening. "Because sometimes, sweetie, strangers are just friends we haven't had the chance to know yet," Linda replied, smoothing his hair with maternal tenderness. "And because your daddy loves you so much, he was brave enough to listen when someone else saw what he was feeling in his heart." At the hospital, the emergency room team took one look at Alex and immediately whisked him away for evaluation. Within an hour, the diagnosis was confirmed: acute appendicitis that would have likely become life-threatening within the next 12 hours. As Robert sat in the surgical waiting room, Linda beside him offering the quiet support that only another parent could provide, he turned to her with tears in his eyes. "How did you know? The doctors missed it completely." "Sometimes," Linda said softly, "caring for people teaches you to see beyond the surface." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Love has a way of making us notice what really matters. 3 hours later, the surgeon emerged with news that confirmed Linda's life-saving instincts. Alex's appendix had been on the verge of rupturing, and the emergency surgery had been performed just in time. As Robert collapsed with relief, Linda quietly stepped aside to let father and son have their moment when Alex was wheeled back to his room, sleepy but safe. The next morning, Linda arrived at the hospital with a thermos of Joe's famous chicken soup and a small teddy bear she had picked up from the gift shop. She found Alex sitting up in bed, color returned to his cheeks, chattering excitedly about the really cool scar he was going to have. "Linda!" he called out when he saw her, his face lighting up with the pure joy that only children can express so completely. "Dad says you saved my life." Robert stood up from the bedside chair, and Linda was surprised to see that this powerful, successful man was fighting back tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he said simply. "If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't trusted what you were seeing." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't need to thank me," Linda replied, settling into the chair beside Alex's bed. "You just need to remember that sometimes the most important medicine isn't in a prescription bottle. It's in paying attention to the people we love." Over the following weeks, as Alex recovered completely, an unexpected friendship blossomed. Robert would bring Alex to the diner every Sunday for breakfast, where Linda would save their favorite corner booth and always have extra whipped cream ready for Alex's pancakes. The wealthy businessman and the small-town waitress discovered they shared something more valuable than money could buy: the understanding that true wealth comes from the connections we make and the care we show for one another. Robert eventually established a scholarship fund in Linda's name at the local nursing school, but he always insisted that no amount of money could truly repay someone for the gift of listening to their heart when it mattered most. Linda, for her part, continued doing exactly what she had always done: serving others with attention, kindness, and the wisdom that comes from understanding that every person who walks through the door carries a story worth noticing. As Alex often told anyone who would listen, sometimes the most important doctor isn't the one with the diploma on the wall. Sometimes it's the person who cares enough to really see you when you need it most. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope, intuition, and the beautiful connections that remind us what truly matters in life.